What is going on, guys? We are back playing some more Surviving with Mechanism version 10, and today we are going to be setting up 4 times ore processing. Now, we've had 3 times ore processing running outside the base for quite some time now. I'm pretty sure we set it up in episode 2, and we never really touched it. I've just been having everything we get from the digital miner run through there, and it's been sufficient up until now for the most part. Thankfully, we haven't done anything too crazy, but as we start to approach these mid to late game builds, and a lot of the ones in the recent episodes have been those, they tend to get a little bit more expensive. You may have been noticing some of the resource counts we've been using in the last couple episodes have been a little bit higher than some of the earlier on ones, so we want to make sure we're getting the most bang for our buck out of the ores that we are getting from the digital miner to make sure that the resource cost of some of these really awesome builds never becomes an issue. And the way we can do that is by very easily upgrading our 3 times ore processing setup we have currently to a 4 times ore processing setup. Obviously, that is not the max is 5, but the upgrade from 3 to 4 is very simple. The upgrade from 4 to 5 is not as simple, so we're just going to be going to the 4 times today, and we'll get to 5 times later. One thing I do want to note is that we are doing it today and we didn't do it any earlier because we do have one prerequisite that's relatively large for this episode, and that is going to be setting up the thermal evaporation plant, which we did a couple episodes ago. The first one that we have over here is currently netting us a fair bit of brine, and that is what you are going to need for your actual ore processing. It's not going to be used as one of the processing machines, obviously, but it is going to be used in getting one of the chemicals that is going to go into the processing machine that we're adding on today. So if you do not have a thermal evaporation plant, you are not going to be able to set up 4 times ore processing. So the first thing you should do is go and watch the episode on how to set this up and get it up and running before you worry about upgrading your ore processing. Once you have that, we're going to be going over today everything you need to know to do 4 times ore processing, not just the upgrades to 3 times. So hopefully everyone who already has it set up will bear with me, but we are going to be resetting it up in the new basement. So everything is going to be reconstructed, not just the additional machines, and there really aren't that many that get added on. There is 1 new processing machine and then 2 additional machines that we need to add on to process the brine into the chemical we need to put into the actual setup. So one last thing before we jump into the crafting is, you may have already noticed there are chapters now on this video. It's a function that YouTube offers. I don't know how long it's been a thing, but they offer it to separate your video out and easily allow people to click on different timestamps without having to go in like the comments to find them. So most videos now are going to be separated into 3 different parts, being the introduction and summary, which is what we are currently in right now, then the crafting portion of the video, and then the actual setup of what we're doing that day. I'm not going to remove the crafting from these, even though a lot of people tend to request that, because some people do want to see the crafting. They want to get an idea of how expensive it's going to be, or if they're not playing with, JEI or something like that, for some reason, I don't know, some people do it, then they might need to actually know the recipes for what we're doing that day. So the crafting will stay, but I have no hard feelings towards you if you want to absolutely skip over it and just get to the setup because you're too darn excited to actually wait. But now that I've said that, for those of you that want to skip ahead, feel free to do so because we are jumping into the crafting today, which thankfully is really not that much. Like I said earlier, we are really only tacking on 1 additional processing machine to the setup today, and that is going to be the chemical injection chamber. It's a very simple machine to work with, and so we're just going to be throwing this on the beginning of our setup and making sure it's outputting into the purification chamber and then continues on the setup like we had in 3 times ore processing from there. The only thing is that the chemical injection chamber needs to have a certain chemical in it. And so to make that chemical, we are going to be using the chemical infuser and the electrolytic separator on the brine that we have in our thermal evaporation plant, and then to get the brine over to our setup without having to pipe it over. And of course you can if you want to, but we are going to be using the quantum entangloporter. Now, we have not actually used this block in the series so far, but I've been working with it off camera as I open up some space in the base and make the basement. And essentially what it is, if you played a very long time ago, it's very similar to Tesseracts, but it allows for the wireless transportation of fluids, gases, energy, items, stuff like that. So you can move it around the base without having to have wires going everywhere. It is very expensive though, so if you don't have a ton of money, or I guess resources I should say, to throw around in the game right now, then you don't need to set it up. You can just directly pipe stuff from the thermal evaporation plant over to this setup. So we're going to be making 2 of those today, one for the input, one for the output, and then we have the crafting of the electrolytic separator, the crafting of the chemical infuser, and then right over here, the most expensive part, the crafting of the chemical injection chamber. And I just have to say that, this blue, for some reason, I find it very aesthetically pleasing. So I was thinking that while I was setting this up today, and I felt I had to note it. So hopefully some of you guys agree. But then down here, we have the old 3x ore processing setup. So these are the machines that you will need on top of what I already discussed if you are not upgrading a setup, but you're making one completely fresh. And that would be one other electrolytic separator, an electric pump, an enrichment chamber, an energized smelter, a purification chamber, and a crusher. Those are the other ones that we already had made, and those will be tacked on to the end of our setup. So we're going to grab out all the stuff that we need for crafting right now and quickly breeze through that. And then there is something in the chest above the one we're in right now that was very annoying to make, but will be very useful later. But we'll get to that once I finish this. So we got the chemical injection chamber, the electrolytic separator, and the chemical infuser. And then we will be making 2 quantum entangloporters, which require each of them 4 refined obsidian ingots, 2 ultimate control circuits, a teleportation core, and 2 atomic alloy. So like I said, relatively expensive, but well worth it if you're actually at the point in the game where you're transporting a ton of stuff over long distances, or you have a ton of resources to spare and don't really care. Now in this chest up here, what took me forever to actually craft, because it wasn't really expensive, but just very tedious, are all these upgrades. And so we're going to be working with, I believe, 8 different machines total today. And so you can see that we have a lot of these in here. Certain upgrades only apply to certain machines, things like the gas upgrades, muffling upgrades, stuff like that. So I made all of these so we can fully upgrade our setup, and I'll be throwing those in today after we have it going. And then we also have the basic tier installers, something that I briefly want to discuss later on how they work, but the idea is these allow us to upgrade these machines, which are considered the very base level, to the basic factory version of the machines, which allow them to process more than a single type at a same time. So eventually you can get them up to where they can process like 4 or 5 different types of ores at the same time. They can run a bunch in parallel, and this is how we're going to start doing that. And so instead of having to actually upgrade these in the crafting grid, which we can do, I made a bunch of basic tier installers, which allow us to right click them onto the machines once they're set up, and it will upgrade them from there. So I think those are also very useful. We're going to briefly cover those, but we'll quickly rest so that it is daytime and we don't get stuff walking into our base killing us. And we are going to head downstairs and start setting this up. Now, this is the basement, nothing super fancy down here. I worked on this off camera just because we need some more room to set stuff up in. We've got too much stuff going on upstairs. So we're going to be starting right over here today in this nice open space, a nice clean template. It looks a little bit like a hospital in here with how gray and white it is. But we're going to start out with the, chemical injection chamber. And then we go to the purification chamber, the crusher, the enrichment chamber, and then the energized smelter. And the way I'm setting these up today is for an actual reason, because I want it to flow into each other. And so we're going to put them one off the wall so that we can put the wiring behind there for the power. And we are going to start with the chemical injection chamber. We'll do it over here, and we'll start the chemical injection chamber right up at the top. And that's going to go down into the purification chamber. That's then going to go over into the crusher, which is then going to go into the enrichment chamber. And that is then going to go into the energized smelter. And we can get rid of this dirt now. And that's a little bit, always the overpowered tools. But yeah, so we're going to do this. And if we look at an example ore up here and we look at its uses, if we go to the chemical injection chamber, which is right here, you can see that by inputting hydrogen chloride into the chemical injection chamber, we are able to get out 4 gold shards. Then the gold shards are used in the purification chamber for clumps, the crusher for dirty dust, the enrichment chamber to make it regular dust, and then that to make it the ingot. So that is the process, and now we really are just going to be setting stuff up to get the different gases and chemicals for both the chemical injection chamber, which is the new one, and the purification chamber, which we had already used, but I believe we need oxygen for this. If I'm right, yes, we need oxygen. So this actually works out perfectly. The reason being, to make the hydrogen chloride that we need for the chemical injection chamber, we are going to be using the excess hydrogen from the electrolytic separator that's putting the oxygen into the purification chamber. And so we actually can avoid really any complicated mess by setting these machines up in a specific way right over here in this 2x2. So we're going to take out both electrolytic separators, the chemical infuser, the electric pump, and we are going to have some water. And we're going to come right down here. And oh, I guess we have some coal down there. We're going to come right back here too. And I'm going to try and make this a relatively clean looking setup. So we're going to quickly just put this stuff down right here, if I can put it down properly. And we're going to put the water down here and build up. We are then going to put down, and I'll put down a universal cable back here because we're going to need to orient the pump properly, but we're going to put down the pump right here. Now this is going to be the pump that gets us the water for the electrolytic separator. So we're going to put that down directly on top of this right here. And this is going to be the one that is inputting the oxygen to the right to the purification chamber. And then the hydrogen from this is going to be going out the top into the chemical infuser. So we're going to want to grab that out and put it down right on top here, like that. Now this chemical infuser is going to be outputting the hydrogen chloride directly into the chemical injection chamber. So this works perfectly right here, but the chemical infuser does need to actually have stuff input from the other side. And if we go, and I'm just going to quickly go from here, but if we go to the recipe for hydrogen chloride, you can see the chemical infuser is making it from chlorine and hydrogen. So the hydrogen is taken care of. We've got that. Now we need to get the chlorine to input it from the left of this machine. And if we look at the recipe for the chlorine, it's made from using the electrolytic separator on brine, which is the reason we need the thermal evaporation plant. And from that, we are going to get sodium and chlorine. Now the sodium is used for a coolant as an example, but we're not going to really need it for anything right now. But we are going to use the chlorine. And so right up here, we are going to put down our other electrolytic separator. And then directly below that goes the quantum entangloporter. So right here, this is the setup. Now you can put some storage over here if you want or something for the energized smelter output. But for now, this is the setup that will directly run into each other. And again, as I always say, like we did in 3 times or processing, now comes the part that's actually, I think is kind of fun, but some people find annoying, which is making sure the inputs and outputs are correct for everything. So what we're going to do is quickly run upstairs and actually set up the quantum entangloporter really quick, just so that we can actually verify that this is functioning properly. And so right here, we're going to throw this down. And I currently have one for fissile fuel and power, but because we want power and brine to be put in this one, we are going to set this one to the power frequency, and then we're going to configure it so that the brine is being input on here. So you can see that it allows it to connect. It's setting those as input on pretty much every face. So not really anything we have to worry about or adjust right now. And you can see if we look up top that the brine currently has 112,000 millibuckets stored in here, and the power is fluctuating because right now we have power coming in. Even though the reactor is off, we've got power coming in from our setup over here. So this is good. It can transport the brine from the thermal evaporation plant downstairs for us and power for these machines at the same time. So now what we're going to do is grab out our basic universal cables on the back here, and we're just going to hook everything up like so. And you can see this is the only one that doesn't connect, and that's because we have to set it to this frequency. Now it connects, and if we go to configuring the sides, the first one we'll go to is energy, and we are going to set it to being output and set it to being auto eject. And I believe that should be, Okay guys, so we are back. Now there was just a little bit of an issue with the actual power input for this, not being able to give power to this because it was actually being completely pulled out by our setup upstairs, trying to input them at the maximum rate into our induction matrix. So I just adjusted the power input for this, and now that there's actually power to spare in here, it is able to output them to our machines. So if we look at the side configs for the energy, they're all set on output. Really, you only would need the back to be set on output output and have it on auto eject. And there we go. Now everything is receiving power and these are all able to function. And you can see here that the electrolytic separator, which is what we can hear, a little bit annoying, but this is actually running and we are getting the oxygen here. And I believe it is inputting, if we can see here, it's inputting the hydrogen into our quantum entangloporter. So not actually where we want the hydrogen to go, so we can adjust this one first. And so if you look at gases, it's currently outputting that to the left. We don't want it there, we want it going to the top. And so it's actually going to hold it here. The first thing we also want to make sure we do before we leave this machine is set both of these to dumping excess. The reason being, we want to make sure that neither one of these ends up being the limiting reactant in the rate of production for this setup. So either one of these could end up being the issue if one of them has too much and you're not able to produce enough of the hydrogen chloride, or you get a bottleneck here and you run out of oxygen. So the easiest way to deal with that is dump both on excess. And so you'll still have some in there, but you're not going to have the entire process stop because one of these is full. So now we need to come up to the chemical infuser up here and make sure that the input for the gases is set on the bottom there for the first one. So if you see here, we now have hydrogen coming in on the left from the bottom, completely emptied it out, so that's good. Now what we need to do is make sure that we have the chlorine coming in the side here, but we don't have any chlorine over here yet. We first need to have the input from the output from the quantum entangloporter, putting the brine up out the top. So if we put this to output and auto eject, we now have this electrolytic separator filled with brine, and we have sodium and chlorine being separated here. And we are going to put dumping excess on the sodium only because that is going to be the one that we have absolutely no use for. You can see it listed as a coolant, and we're not really going to be using it for that yet. Eventually we will get there, but right now it serves no purpose for us, so we're dumping it. And the chlorine, once it gets completely backed up, we have no reason to dump that. Then we'd just be, wasting power. So if eventually it does get backed up, that's fine. So we're leaving this one on idle. Now what we want to do is make sure that we have these properly set up so we're outputting the chlorine. So the side config for this, we want to come over to, I believe it's it's a gas for this. So we go over to gases and it should be outputting, but this one does not have the input set properly. So the input for this is going to be right there. So we can see that we have the input 2, which is the right side in the visual on this. So we look here, it's the right side one set to the chlorine. And now we are producing hydrogen chloride. So now we need to get the hydrogen chloride over to the chemical injection chamber. So we want to now make the output from this to the right. So we're going to put the output being the blue to the right side. And then we need to make sure that this one, which it looks like it's already accepting it incorrectly because it's got hydrogen chloride in there. But if we come in here, we want to make sure that it is input correctly. So you can see that we have input on the left. It's actually input everywhere, which is fine because we don't have risk of gases coming from anywhere else. So we can leave it like that. So now we have the oxygen in here properly. We've got the hydrogen chloride in here, and we now have absolutely all the gases that we are going to be dealing with dealt with suitably. Obviously you do have the option of processing these elsewhere and having a quantum entangloporter bring them over here instead of having the machines here. That's your choice. You could pipe things over here and not use any quantum entangloporter. Really, how you choose to deal with these is up to you, but I chose to have them directly next to them right here since it really isn't a huge deal. Now what we need to do is go through and make sure that all of these machines are properly outputting and inputting to one another. Like we did in the 3x OR processing, it's very simple. It's just going to be zigzagging back and forth between these since they really don't have any secondary outputs or anything like that. So we always need to make sure that these have auto eject on, and we are probably going to put a hopper on the top or something like that. If we have the digital miner directly putting stuff in here, chances are it's also going to come from the top. So the input is going to be left on the top, and then we are going to want the bottom to be the output. We're going to want to make sure that's not on the side. We don't want input over there or on the front. And this one has energy directly set to the back. I don't think that really matters. I don't know why you have that setting when you don't directly have energy selected. But yeah, you want to make sure that you have the input on the top and the output on the bottom. Now that we have the output on the bottom, we need to make sure that this one also set to auto eject the purification chamber, has the input on the top, which it does, and the output on the right. So this one's actually already properly set just because of how it defaults to that setting. Now we need to go to the crusher, make sure that this one has auto eject on. It's got its input on the left, and we need the output to be on the top. We go to the enrichment chamber. We're going to make sure the input's on the bottom and output is on the right. Make sure auto eject is on. And then lastly, we have the energized smelter, and we want to make sure that the input is on the left. And here I'm going to put the output on the bottom with auto eject. We don't have anywhere for it to go right now, but if you want to put some chest or something down here, you can feel free to. If you want to pipe items out down here, you can also do that. But now everything in here should actually be able to function. And the way we can quickly go and check that is, it is nighttime outside, so we're going to sleep real quick. But I have a ton of ore left outside that was currently being processed when I got rid of the machines to bring them downstairs. So if we look in here, we can grab out this iron ore, and we will also come over and grab all the different upgrades in here that we have. I don't think we're going to have enough room, so we're going to grab out just, I want to say the first, maybe we will if we ditch some stuff. If we ditch some of this extra stuff up here, we should have enough room to put all these upgrades in. But we're going to go downstairs and we're going to start adding upgrades and turning these into factories. So because these will be factories and upgrading these means we pretty much need to upgrade these machines over here too. We're going to upgrade everything. So like I said earlier, some of these can take some upgrades that others can't. So we will start from the left and just move across. We'll click the upgrade section, and these can accept, and it says energy and speed upgrades. They can also accept muffling, but I don't have muffling upgrades for these since they really aren't the loudest. I probably should though, since we can hear them right now. They're kind of screeching. But we will put the speed upgrades, wrong side. We will put the speed upgrades in every single one of these. So we're going to put the speed upgrades in all of these on the side here too. And that way we will be processing these at maximum capability for the level of factory that they are. Now if we come back here, it's processed all the speed upgrades. We're going to put energy upgrades in these because adding a ton of speed upgrades is going to make it consume way more energy. So we want to make sure, even though we've got a lot of energy that we can burn through right now, really without any issue, there's no reason to be excessive and just waste stuff for the sake of wasting it. If we have the option of saving it, we should. So we're going to put those in each one of these. And now back at the beginning, I believe these are fully upgraded. The next thing we're going to go to is the chemical injection chamber, and the upgrade we can add for this one and the purification chamber would be the gas upgrades. And these increase the efficiency of gas using machinery, which it pretty much is just these for this setup. So we're going to add those in. And then we've got the muffler upgrades. So once these finish processing through, we're going to toss the muffler upgrades in these 5 machines, which tend to be the loudest in this setup of machines. So some of these are getting really loaded up. We only have 4 of those. So we're going to throw those in each of these like so. And did I miss one of these with the muffling upgrades? Oh, I missed this one right here. There we go. Okay, and then we have the speed and energy, I believe, for right down here. I wanted to make sure that we got to put upgrades in the pump because as you can see, it is not able to pull water fast enough. So we should actually add the speed first. So we'll be putting them in here too. You need to remember that if you add upgrades to some of these and not to others, eventually you are going to run into some very severe bottlenecks in your setup, which will become very obvious to you when you're doing it because it's very easy to notice when you're not pulling enough water, but you will run into those. So chances are it's best to just make upgrades for every one of your machines, and they should be able to process stuff pretty quick now. If we were to throw in a piece of iron ore, you will see how quickly it's actually able to make it through these machines when they are fully upgraded. We already have some stuff being cooked in the energized smelter, and there we go. We're now done. Now that was only a single piece, netting us 4 of these, but compared to how fast it was before, this is way better. The last thing that we are going to do is put in the basic tier installers on all of these machines. And I believe if we just shift right click, we should be able to do that. On each of these, you can see there's a little bit of a visual update. And if we go into them now, you can see that this now allows for 3 in-process things to occur in parallel. So we're able to put in, if you want, 3 of the same ore, and it will process them, and it'll go through, and then it will combine here. You can also have the option of auto sorting stuff in these. So if we have it, you have the option of, separating them out so that iron will all go into one. You also have the option of using this to further speed up your processing. So if you want it to auto sort, as you put a ton in, it will space them out as best it can. Now I do like that. So we're going to do that on all of these. We're going to put on auto sort. It is an option there and even here. So we're going to do that. Some of you may choose not to if you have a bunch of different things processing at once and you want each of them to be done at the same time, but you're not super concerned with how quickly you're getting a ton of one of them, then you don't need auto sort to be on. But for the cases where you're just inputting a ton of iron ore, if you want to make sure that it's being processed as quickly as possible, you're going to want to put on auto sort. So now this setup is pretty much good to go. We could further upgrade these factories to the higher tier factories, but something to note, if you are using those installer upgrades, you cannot leapfrog ahead by just using a higher tier installer upgrade. You need to go tier by tier. So you need to start with the basic, then the advanced, then the elite. You cannot just jump to the advanced version of it and skip over the basic tier. It will not let you do that. So you can't just use that as sort of a cheat to avoid using resources if you just know you want the advanced one to start. So you need to make sure that you have one for each tier. Eventually we will upgrade these completely, but for now, I think this is pretty quick. We can see how fast we are able to process through essentially an entire stack. I know it was a little bit reduced thanks to our earlier trials, but we're able to keep up, hopefully, with the production, as you can see, of the gases that we need. And I'm sure we're burning through power doing this, honestly, but now we've finished with the injection factory. The purification factory is going to be the huge bottleneck, and I'm sure most of you guys can understand why, but this right here is the multiplication step in the process. So this is where the four times multiplication happens. Everywhere else in here is 1-to-1. So you're not going to see any backups anywhere else in here, but right here, this is where you're going to run into a huge bottleneck in your setup. So if you're looking for somewhere to focus your upgrades on in terms of speed upgrades early on, the purifying factory is a good place to start, or really whatever the multiplication step is for your process. So whatever machine comes after the ore is multiplied is where your upgrades need to be, because that one is going to have to keep up with whatever times ore multiplication you have. It's going to have to keep up with that increase in item count. So here, it's going to get 4 times more items than the other machines are used to getting at each batch, because they're coming in at the 4 times multiplication. So if you're using this setup and don't have a ton of upgrades to spare, put the speed upgrades in the purifying factory, and then make sure that you're also supporting the electrolytic separator that's inputting the oxygen into this, because they are going to be processing a ton of stuff. But I think that's going to be it for today, guys. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video and found it useful. I think ore processing is one of the most useful things that Mekanism offers, especially when you're playing in a mod pack, because you're able to get to some pretty crazy numbers in the ore processing. It's been pointed out to me that other mods do offer things like 4 times, I'm sure even 5 times, but I think Mekanism is really one of the staple ones for it. I by no means want to detract from other mods having the option of high ore processing, but it's not crazy common that you get to things like 5 times ore processing. So I definitely think it's worthwhile to do in Mekanism, and 4 times with how simple it is without a doubt worth it. So hopefully you guys are able to make use of all the resources you will have in your world once you have this set up. Hopefully you guys are also having a great start to your Thanksgiving week if you have off or don't have off. Either way, I wish you guys a happy Thanksgiving. If there's not a video out before then, I think there may actually be a video out on Thanksgiving, but if there's not, happy early Thanksgiving to all of you. I hope you have a great time, and I will talk to you guys later.
Standing in a glass bowl at the end of a black hole, cold, lost and upside down, faces swirling past me, all my memories rolling vastly.